There are anti-immigration riots in Ireland. They broke out after one of the immigrants brutally raped a 10-year-old girl. The child was taken to hospital and the paedophile was taken to a state-funded hotel protected by the police. This is where angry Irish people are gathering, emphasising that enough is enough and that they will fight for a safe future for their children and women and for the freedom of their country. And the authorities? They claim that the Irish need to work on their prejudices against immigrants. Ireland, the town of Sagart in County Dublin. For several days now, riots have been going on outside one of the hotels that the authorities are using as a centre for foreigners.
I'm here at the protest at City West Hotel, where a migrant, an asylum seeker that was supposed to be deported, stayed in the country and raped a 10-year-old Irish girl that was in state care. As you can see, things are massively kicking off here. There's probably well over 1,000 protesters. Unfortunately, this isn't the first crime we've seen like this, even in the last year or two.
The protest was peaceful at first, but the situation got out of control. The protesters clashed with police, stones, bottles, firecrackers, and even lasers were used to blind the pilot of a police helicopter.
It's our people fighting for our country, fighting for our children, fighting for the freedom of us. We're not safe walking around our own streets anymore.
Especially the women and children.
Especially the women and children. It's not only the women, the elderly that's getting robbed. Don't forget about all our men are getting butchered as well on the streets.
The police are guarding access to the hotel and the paedophile hiding inside. At least 6 Irish people have been arrested, but the number of protesters is growing. So is their frustration and determination. The Irish have had enough of this, but it seems that it is definitely too late. They should have protested, they should have acted when these experiments, this social engineering, were being carried out. In the absence of a response from the state, the Irish are taking matters into their own hands. They're catching illegal immigrants on the streets and taking justice into their own hands. Meanwhile, presidential candidate Heather Humphreys called the protesters' actions absolutely appalling and pointed out that work needs to be done on prejudices against immigrants. The Irish government's behaviour is characteristic of all the elites of this neo-Marxist new left that rules Europe, that is, sweeping problems under the carpet and implementing a certain scenario, a bizarre one, because the real threat, the decline in the sense of security, is very high throughout Europe. Everyone knows this, but it only pretends to be doing something about it. On the 12th of October, European Union member states began implementing a new system of entry and exit controls at external borders. Foreigners from outside the European Union must register electronically. The aim is to register all third country nationals who apply for short stay. We will collect biometric data, in particular facial images, photographs and fingerprints. In reality, however, preparations are underway to implement the Migration Pact. From the middle of next year, each country will have to accept a number of immigrants specified by the European Commission or pay for their livelihood. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz argues that immigrants are and will remain an integral part of the European Union. In the future, we will continue to need immigration, and this applies to both Germany and all countries of the European Union. We also need it above all in our labour market. Immigrants live in Germany and work in Germany. We simply cannot do without them anymore, regardless of where they come from, what colour their skin is, and whether they are first, second, third or fourth generation immigrants. The Migration Pact was effectively blocked by the Law and Justice government. The European Commission adopted it a few days after the December 13th coalition took power in Poland. However, Donald Tusk argues that Poland will be exempted from it and that the current opposition is responsible for bringing migrants into our country. Law and Justice not only allowed legal and illegal migrants to enter without any controls, but also accepted those returned by Germany, 4 times more than now. They know that the facts are merciless to them, so they lie about migration morning, noon and night, even when they sleep. The statistics on migration and visa issue for the Morawiecki government are devastating. These are hundreds of thousands of visas. In addition to hundreds of thousands of visas, there are visas sold somewhere in the markets. However, the facts tell a different story. They show that last year was a record year in terms of immigrants admitted to Poland, when Tusk was already in power. They're accepting immigrants, and I'm convinced that they will have to accept immigrants under the Migration Pact. German politicians say outright that Donald Tusk agreed to this, that Donald Tusk will implement it, and today in Poland we are already seeing the implementation of the Migration Pact based on the fact that foreigners' integration centres are being established throughout the country. And this is despite the clear opposition of Poles. When it turned out that Germany was transferring unwanted illegal immigrants to Poland, citizen patrols immediately went to the borders to document and publicize this practice. Leftist social engineering experiments when it comes to migration, illegal migration or widespread migration will have and are already having terrifying consequences in the West, and we will experience the same if we do not respond appropriately, hence the creation of, among other things, the border defense movement. The problem of illegal mass migration has been going on for over 10 years, and so far mainly affects Western Europe. At the same time, there are more and more situations where the children of native Europeans are a minority in their schools. It seems that the goal is ideological above all else, namely the dilution and destruction of the old structures of nation-states, so that the elite, who also rules the European Union, can simply implement its plan to create an oligarchically governed superstate, even if it means over our dead bodies, because Europeans cannot see the advantages of mass immigration, but they can see the disadvantages. These include an increase in crime, attacks on women and children, riots, and even terrorist attacks.
First came the carrot. Now it's time for the stick. The Americans have imposed sanctions on Russia. The U.S. Treasury Department has announced that its targets are Russia's two largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. Washington hopes this will force Putin to halt military operations. At the same time, European Union countries are debating the seizure and use of frozen Russian assets to finance aid to Ukraine. Kiev emphasizes that it is ready for both a ceasefire and talks with Moscow. This is the moment a Russian drone strikes a kindergarten in Kharkiv. And this is a few moments after the attack. There are no military facilities within a radius of many kilometers. This is the city center. The Russians know exactly where they are targeting. What kind of ceasefire can we talk about when people are simply being killed? It's just impossible. The Russians are relentless, both on land and in the air. During the day, they attempt to break through the front lines, and at night, they terrorize the whole of Ukraine. Despite this, Kiev wants negotiations with Moscow, as do the Americans. Putin, however, remains adamant, hence the balance between diplomacy and confrontation. Now is the time to strike.
Today is a very big day in terms of what we're doing. Look, these are tremendous sanctions. These are very big. Those are against their two big oil companies, and we hope that they won't be on for long. We hope that the war will be settled. We just answered having to do with the various forms of missiles and everything else that we're looking at, but we don't think that's going to be necessary.
Washington has imposed sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, two oil companies that are key to the Kremlin. This includes freezing assets in the U.S., banning the purchase of oil from these companies, and threatening to impose sanctions on countries that trade with them. Suffice it to say that Rosneft alone accounts for half of Russia's oil production.
What sanctions can achieve successfully is limiting the resources available at in Putin's hands to continue this war. Much of the revenues of the budget are being used to fund Russia's military-industrial complex.
The White House also denied reports in the American media that Kiev had been given permission to purchase and use American long-range missiles. The Secretary of State emphasized that the administration still hopes to reach an agreement with the Kremlin.
We'd still like to meet with the Russians. We'd still want to, and I think I had a good call with Foreign Minister Lavrov, and we'll follow up on that. We're always going to be interested in engaging if there's an opportunity to achieve peace. I think the president has said repeatedly for a number of months now that at some point he will have to do something if we don't make progress on the peace deal. Today was the day he decided to do something.
And to come to the table.
Trump has the full support of NATO. It is no coincidence that the Secretary General appeared at the White House today.
Today we particularly focus on how can we end the war. What can I do, what can NATO do to support President Trump's vision of ending this war, ending the killing in Ukraine, including what we can do to make sure that Putin accepts the president's view that the two parties should stop where they are. As he said on Friday and on Sunday, I totally support him, and we will see how we can do that.
What's next? It depends. At the same time, the European Union is imposing another 19th package of sanctions on Russia. More important, however, is the possible use of Russian assets frozen in the West. We are talking about as much as $350 billion. The Kremlin's reaction to the announcement of the seizure of this money is hysterical, which clearly indicates that Europe and the US have hit a sore spot for Moscow's social and political elite.
Sytuacja jest jasna.
The situation is clear. Russia is the aggressor. Another package of sanctions is aimed at Russian oil companies. Three major ones, Gazprom, Rosneft and Lukoil, are companies that should now be invisible, whether we look at Europe or the United States. No business transactions. Despite this, there are sports clubs in Europe that sign sponsorship agreements with Lukoil. Why does business as usual still apply? Today, I am checking. New European sanctions against Russia include a ban on transactions for Rosneft and Gazprom Neft, as well as a ban on importing Russian LNG to the European Union from 2027. US President Donald Trump also confirmed the imposition of sanctions on Russian oil companies, including Lukoil, and cancelled his meeting with Vladimir Putin.
They're massive sanctions, and sanctions on oil. The two biggest oil companies, among the biggest in the world, but they're Russian. They do a lot of oil. And hopefully it'll push, hopefully he'll become reasonable, and hopefully Zelensky will be reasonable.
At the same time, Donald Trump denied reports in the Wall Street Journal that the US had allowed Ukraine to attack targets inside Russia, far from the front line. Both the scope and accuracy of our long-range sanctions against Russia are increasing. In fact, every day, or even every other day, there are attacks on Russian oil refineries. While the world is fighting Russian oil giants, Ukraine is responding to aggression with its weapons. However, there is no doubt about who is the aggressor in this war. Sanctions against Russia, Russian companies, and visa refusals for Russians have been a reality known to the whole world for over 3 years. There is a simpler way, in my opinion, which is simply not to buy gas or oil from Russia, and no one in Europe should do so. I also agree here with President Trump's call in this regard, and with further sanctions that have been adopted by the European Union in this area. But there is one sports club that seems to have forgotten about the sanctions for a moment, Austria Vienna. A few days ago, they decided to resume cooperation with the Austrian branch, a subsidiary of Lukoil. This decision quickly attracted media attention, with the most notable article being published in the daily newspaper Der Standard, which dealt with the decision. The pressure makes sense. The sponsorship agreement that Austria Vienna had with Lukoil was terminated today, only under pressure from criticism and outrage from the public, politicians and other countries, and the club's own fans. In view of recent international events, we have agreed with Lukoil International to terminate our cooperation with immediate effect. Austria Vienna announced on its website the company has not yet been subject to EU sanctions. This is despite the fact that it is the largest private company in Russia and the third largest overall after Gazprom and Rosneft.
Donald Trump jest twardym graczem.
Donald Trump is a tough player. He is someone who thinks in business terms. He tried to come to an agreement with Putin. He tried to negotiate peace in some way. It didn't work, so he is imposing sanctions. Austria Vienna is a weak club that lost to Lech Poznan, and it will suffer the consequences of its ties with Russia. The interests of sports clubs with Russian companies are a broader problem. The phenomenon is known as sportwashing. That is an attempt to improve a company's image by financing sport. Lukoil International is an Austrian subsidiary of Lukoil. It has already sponsored special Bundesliga teams, playing among others in children's competitions and AMP football competitions for disabled players. The Kremlin-controlled giants have repeatedly sought to build their image and, going further, to build the Kremlin's influence in various countries through sponsorship, including of sports clubs and the federations, because at one time Gazprom was also one of the sponsors of UEFA. So it is no surprise that this blood money from Russia is used to support various sports initiatives in order to build these bridgeheads, despite the very negative image of the Russian Federation and the crimes being committed in Ukraine. The exploitation of children and disabled athletes continues to help Russia organize major events, such as the Olympic Games in Sochi, World Championships in various disciplines, and even Formula One racing. Some people simply don't mind rubles stained with blood. Former Austrian Chancellor Wolfgang Schüssel is sent to become a new member of Lukoil's board of directors. In other words, business, even with companies linked to a war criminal.